Brendan Johnson back in studio with us. Good to see you again,
Good
sir.
to see you, Bob.
All right, we have questions here, or I have questions for you this morning. Real estate is governed at a state level, correct?
Yes.
What are some Minnesota laws that differ from other states? It makes Minnesota extra special. And why are some of these differences so important to be aware of, both as a buyer and as a seller?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Let me just start with universally or nationally, there are fair housing laws that we all comply with, right? Protected classes, discrimination, all of that. But outside of that, for the most part, every state has their own state statutes that govern real estate laws. And there's a couple that where Minnesota kind of stick out. And one is title or closing. So a lot of, especially East Coast states, use attorneys to close a transaction versus we use a title company. And the nuances there is if you go what's referred to as an attorney state, you will actually have an attorney drafting, notarizing your documents, reviewing all your documents. Whereas here in Minnesota, we have title companies, which they're licensed closers, and they all often have an attorney at their disposal or in their company, but there are licensed closers notarizing, drafting
Gotcha.
Your documents. So it's a little bit different. And that's not to say we do have, I think, I'm just thinking now, there's an attorney's office, and we have some closings in Meeker County area. A lot of times there's an attorney's office that does the closings for us there as well.
Sure. Is one better than the other, or is it like a horse apiece, probably?
It's different. No, I wouldn't say one's better than the other. It's just difference. And so a lot of times we get people relocating, and they think, oh, we have to hire an attorney. And no, you don't necessarily have to hire an attorney.
Okay.
You're more than welcome free too. But generally these title companies have a attorney as a resource as well too.
And I would imagine that if you are using an attorney in another state, they are as well versed as they would ever possibly need to be.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. One of the main differences though in Minnesota, and I've just kind of been gaining more knowledge on this, is Minnesota's referred to as a drafting state. So a lot of other states, and again East Coast, we as realtors have great luxury on what we can write in purchase agreements. In some states, realtors are not allowed to draft language at all in their purchase agreements. It's all drop-down choices, really just filling out forms. And they have a clear distinction in their states between attorneys and licensed real estate agents. So for example, in Minnesota, we have what's called a blank addendum or a blank amendment. We can write within reason whatever we want.
Okay.
You talk to people in some other states, specifically in the South, and they that's foreign to them that we would be allowed to draft clauses, write clauses, because they view it as we're practicing law. And so how it affects people in Minnesota, and I like and respect that we have the freedom to do that.
Yeah.
Where it can get a little suspect is you really got to rely on the particular agent you're using, that they know what they're doing, because you can get into trouble drafting language that you shouldn't be. And I see a lot of language where I know what the intent is, but it's worded poorly. So it's just important to keep in mind that we in Minnesota are not attorneys, but we have great liberties in what we're allowed to draft in the contracts.
Okay, at what point in this whole procedure do these things get written down, get written into contracts?
It's getting more and more common with contingencies, with there's all sorts of nuances when situations arise and how to handle them. We have to draft, and that's what I spend a lot of time working with agents, drafting the language to address just situations that come up in inspections or life situations within a purchase agreement. But you got to know or have a good understanding, and that's why the importance of working with a skilled and experienced agent that's done that really matters.
I was wondering about the inspections, if that wouldn't throw a curveball.
Inspections is where a lot of the language gets added because you're dealing with so many things, but there's so many contingencies. You can only have so many forms that handle stock situations.
Yeah.
Everything is such a unique situation in real estate now where it requires a lot of outside the box thinking, tailored solutions, and that's where we get into drafting. So again, it's just a difference in our state, but again, different agents in different states, they it's foreign to them that we would be
Yeah.
allowed to do that.
And we've talked about some really quirky things that can pop up. I remember when we had conversations about properties that had wells on them.
Yep.
That's one of those deals where you can really probably, I would imagine, have to fill in a few blanks.
Yeah, and absolutely, and how you're going to resolve situations is where you get into drafting. So,
Okay.
Our association, the Minnesota Association of Realtors, does a great job at drafting forms and documents to handle situations, and so they're very well thought out how to handle, if then, what are the solutions, and every situation is covered. But when it gets into the agent's hands to do that, you're really relying on the wherewithal of that particular agent. So it's important to discuss. So when we say why, how do you choose a realtor? These sorts of things matter, to think of based on your experience, all the possible unintended consequences
Right.
that are being thought through when you're drafting that language in that purchase
Yeah.
agreement.
Does the National Association of Realtors enter into this at all, or no?
National Association has their guidelines, which are the Code of Ethics.
Okay.
But we're talking, which is different than state laws.
Yeah.
So there's two things. There's the Realtor Code of Ethics, and then there's each legal state statutes.
Gotcha.
And they're separate.
Okay.
They overlap a little bit, but there's different state laws versus the Code of Ethics. Keep in mind, you can be a real estate licensee and not be a realtor. So you can still practice real estate, be under the subject of the state real estate laws,
Okay.
but not be subject to the Realtor Code of Ethics. Most people are both realtors as well, but there are agents that are not realtor members that subscribe to the Code of Ethics.
All right, let's make sure we get it done the right way.
Yes.
How do we work with you guys at Voigt Johnson?
320-774-2400 or online at VoigtJohnson.com.
Brandon, thank you.
Thanks, Bob.